The promise. Nida had always been the kind of person who couldn't turn away from anyone in need. She had spent her life volunteering at shelters, fostering pets, and offering help wherever she could. Her friends often joked that she had a heart as big as the world, and Nida never minded the comment. It was true. She was driven by a deep sense of empathy, a need to make the world a better place, no matter how small her contribution. She was in her early 30s when she met Elisa. The two of them had met at a charity event, both volunteers, both eager to make a difference. Elisa was vibrant and full of life, a mother of 5 young children who had faced numerous struggles but always carried herself with grace. Nida admired her strength and resilience, and over time, their friendship blossomed. They shared countless cups of coffee, late-night talks, and dreams of a world where everyone could find love and safety. As years passed, Nida and Elisa became more like sisters than friends. Nida watched as Elisa poured everything she had into raising her children. Malik, Tiana, Elijah, Maya, and little Zion. The kids were a diverse group, each with their own personalities, but they were all bound by Elisa's love and guidance. They were close-knit and full of energy, each one a reflection of their mother's spirit. But life wasn't always easy for Elisa. The strain of raising 5 children as a single mother took its toll. The financial struggles, the long nights of worry, the never-ending cycle of doctor's appointments for one child or another. It was a heavy burden. Despite everything, Elisa never complained. She simply kept going, always with a smile, always with love for her children. But when Elisa was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive illness, the world as Nida knew it began to shift. At first, it seemed like just another hurdle Elisa would overcome. But as the months passed, the illness took hold, draining her energy, her strength, and eventually, her very will to fight. The vibrant woman who had once been full of life was now confined to a hospital bed, her future uncertain. Nida had always been there for Elisa. She had driven her to chemotherapy sessions, helped with the kids when Elisa couldn't, and stayed by her side through every step of the process. But this time, Nida felt helpless. She could see how much Elisa was suffering, and she knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. The hospital room where Elisa now lay felt suffocating. The bright white walls and the sterile smell seemed to close in on Nida as she sat by her friend's side. Elisa's once vibrant face was now pale and drawn, her body frail and weak. Her breathing was shallow, and the once fierce glint in her eyes had dulled. The woman who had been so strong, so full of life, was now reduced to a shadow of her former self. Nida took her best friend's hand, gently squeezing it, trying to offer some comfort. Elisa's grip, though weak, was firm. Nida could feel her pulse, her life still present, though fading. "Promise me something," Elisa whispered, her voice barely audible. Nida leaned in closer, straining to hear, her heart racing. "Anything, Elisa. You know I would do anything for you." Elisa's eyes fluttered as she mustered the strength to continue. "I need you to take care of my children. All 5 of them. When I'm gone, Nida, I need you to make sure they have the love and support they need. I trust you." The words hit Nida like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. And for a moment, the world seemed to tilt. 5 children. Elisa had always been so protective of them, so fiercely independent. The idea of raising them herself had never seemed like a possibility. Nida's mind raced, scrambling to comprehend the magnitude of what she had just been asked to do. "Elisa, I don't know if I can do that," Nida stammered, her voice cracking. "I mean, they're your children. I'm not a mom. I have no idea how to raise them the way you have. I have a life of my own. How can I just step into this huge responsibility?" Tears welled in Elisa's eyes, though they didn't fall. She squeezed Nida's hand once more, a gesture filled with so much love and vulnerability that Nida's heart broke for her. "I know it's a lot to ask," Elisa whispered, "but I trust you, Nida. You're the only one I trust. You're like a sister to me, and I need to know they'll be okay. When I'm gone, I need you to promise me you'll keep them together, that you'll love them like I have." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable weighted with the profound trust that Elisa was placing in her. Nida's chest tightened, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had always loved Elisa's children, had always been there to help when needed, but this was something entirely different. This was a promise that would change her life forever. She looked at Elisa, her face a mixture of sorrow, fear, and determination. She couldn't imagine a world without her best friend, and the thought of raising Elisa's children without her felt almost impossible. But in that moment, as Elisa's tired eyes met hers, Nida knew she had to do this. Not just for Elisa, but for the children who had already lost so much. "I promise, Elisa," Nida said softly, her voice filled with unwavering resolve. "I will take care of them. I'll love them like my own. I promise." Elisa's expression softened, a hint of relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Nida. I knew you would. I knew you'd do this for me. I'm so grateful." As the words left Elisa's lips, Nida felt something inside her shift. It was as if the universe had handed her a responsibility far greater than anything she could have ever imagined, but at the same time, it felt like the right thing to do. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she would make sure those children had a future, a safe and loving home, no matter what. That night, after Elisa had fallen into a fitful sleep, Nida sat alone in the hospital room, reflecting on the promise she had made. Her mind wandered to the 5 children: Malik, Tiana, Elijah, Maya, and Zion. They were all so different, each with their own needs, dreams, and struggles. How could she possibly be the mother they needed? But as the hours passed, Nida came to a quiet, resolute conclusion. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about love. And love, she knew, could move mountains. She would give them all the love she had in her heart, and she would give it freely. When she left the hospital that night, she did so with a heart full of both fear and hope. Fear of the unknown, fear of the challenges ahead, but also with hope. Hope that she could be the mother these children needed. Hope that together they could build a life filled with love, healing, and family. And so, Nida's journey began. A journey that would shape her life in ways she never expected. One that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But it was a journey she would embark on with unwavering determination, because she had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. The challenge. The first few weeks after Elisa's passing were a blur. Nida's life, once comfortably predictable, had shifted in an instant, and now she was thrust into a world of uncertainty. The children were still reeling from the loss of their mother, and Nida was trying to figure out how she could fill the void left behind, not just as their guardian, but as their protector, their new source of stability. The logistics were overwhelming. Nida had to move them all into her modest 2-bedroom apartment, which now felt much smaller with 5 kids filling it. She had no idea how to manage it all. There was the school run, the groceries, the laundry, the endless stream of appointments, and of course, the emotional baggage each child carried from the loss of their mother. Each day felt like a test, a new challenge she didn't feel prepared for. The transition was far from easy. Malik, at 14, was the most stoic of the group. He was quiet, withdrawn, and often spent his time in his room, either studying or playing music on the guitar his mother had given him. Nida could sense the weight of responsibility he had taken on for his younger siblings, and though he didn't speak much about it, Nida saw the subtle signs. The way he tried to be the man of the house, how he took charge during meals, how he would hover protectively over his sisters, making sure they were safe. Malik was trying so hard to fill shoes no 14-year-old should have to. Tiana, 12, was a whirlwind of emotion. She expressed her grief through art, drawing, painting, and making little crafts that she would leave around the house, reminders of her need to process her feelings. But it wasn't just art that Tiana turned to. She also had a fiery side, and when she didn't get her way, she would lash out, throwing tantrums, slamming doors, or yelling. Nida knew it wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was grief, pure and simple. But it didn't make the outbursts any easier to deal with. Elijah, 7, had a tendency to get into trouble. He was a boy of boundless energy and curiosity, always asking questions, running through the house, playing with toys, and trying to get attention in any way he could. His behavior wasn't problematic. It was just that his world had been turned upside down, and he didn't know how to make sense of it. He asked Nida questions that broke her heart. When is Mom coming home? And will I ever see her again? There were days when she had no answers, no comfort to give him other than hugs and reassurances that one day it would get better. Maya, 5 years old, was the gentle soul of the group. She was sweet, kind, and often sought comfort in Nida's arms, asking her to read her stories or tuck her into bed. It was as though Maya could sense that Nida was struggling too, and in her innocence, she would cuddle up to her new mother, giving her that soft, unconditional love that made Nida's heart ache with both joy and sorrow. It wasn't that Maya didn't miss her mother. She did, but Maya was young, and for her, the concept of forever was still foreign. She just knew she missed her mother's voice, her hugs, but at times, she seemed to believe that everything would be okay, as long as Nida was there. Jian, the youngest at just 2 years old, didn't understand death. He couldn't process the fact that his mother was never coming back, and so he clung to Nida in a way that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. He would reach up to her, arms outstretched, with a simple plea, "Up, up." Zion's eyes, so innocent and trusting, would stare into hers as if asking her to make everything okay again. Nida often found herself staring at him, wondering how on earth she could be the mother he needed. For Nida, the first few months felt like an emotional roller coaster, full of ups and downs, and more downs than she had ever imagined. She would find herself exhausted by the end of the day, physically drained from managing 5 different emotional states while juggling her job and other responsibilities. Yet every time she thought she couldn't go on, the kids would do something small, a hug, a quiet thank you, a thoughtful gesture that would remind her why she had made the promise to Elisa. It was these moments that gave her the strength to keep going. In the mornings, Nida would wake up early to prepare breakfast for the kids, trying her best to keep everything running smoothly. The apartment was always full of noise, shuffling feet, the sound of TV shows in the background, clattering dishes, and sometimes it felt like there was no room to breathe. Malik, still reserved, would sometimes make breakfast for the younger kids, a small act of kindness that made Nida's heart swell. She saw him trying to be the man of the house, but she also saw the strain it was putting on him. She wanted to help him, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap. Tiana, in the meantime, would often challenge her authority, questioning every rule, and testing Nida's patience. It wasn't defiance for the sake of rebellion. It was pain. Pain masked as anger. Nida knew this, but at times, it didn't make the arguments any easier to handle. There were moments when she didn't know how to reach her, how to calm the storms within Tiana's heart. And there were moments when Nida herself felt like breaking down, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when she was the only stable thing these kids had left. Elijah's energy, though often a blessing, could be exhausting. He would run around the apartment like a tornado, knocking things over, dragging the others into his mischief. It wasn't intentional. It was simply his way of coping. The world had crumbled around him, and in his young mind, if he could just keep moving, keep playing, he could avoid facing the deeper pain. Maya's sweetness was her gift, but it was also her shield. She would smile through the pain, and it was difficult for Nida to tell when Maya was truly happy and when she was simply pretending. But Maya's innocence also served as a reminder of what they were all fighting for, to restore some semblance of normalcy in the midst of their grief. And then there was Zion, who seemed to understand more than his 2 years would suggest. At times, he would look up at Nida with a deep, knowing gaze, almost as though he understood the magnitude of the changes around him. He could not yet talk in full sentences, but his wide eyes and little words communicated everything Nida needed to know. He had learned to say her name, and hearing him say Mama for the first time brought both tears and joy to Nida's eyes. It was a bittersweet moment. He was not her biological son, but in that instant, it felt like he had always been hers. But Nida couldn't do it alone. There were days when she felt like she was barely keeping her head above water, when the weight of her responsibilities threatened to crush her. She often called Elisa's relatives for support, especially Elisa's sister, Janelle, who was a constant source of guidance. Janelle had her own children, but she made time to help Nida, offering advice on everything from dealing with grief to helping the kids cope with the new reality of their lives. Janelle's support was invaluable, and Nida came to rely on her more than she ever expected. Despite the challenges, the family slowly began to form its rhythm. There were still disagreements, still moments of tension, but there were also moments of joy. Slowly but surely, the children began to trust Nida, and she began to love them as if they were her own. She still had no idea what she was doing half the time, but she learned to take things day by day, to approach each challenge as it came, and to never give up. In the quiet moments, when the house settled down and the children were finally asleep, Nida would sit in the living room, exhausted but grateful. She would close her eyes and think about Elisa, about the woman who had trusted her with this impossible task. She would never be able to replace Elisa, but she was determined to make sure the kids knew they were loved, and that their mother's legacy lived on. No matter how hard the challenge was, Nida knew one thing for certain. She had made a promise, and she wasn't going to break it. New beginnings. The days stretched into months, and with each passing one, Nida began to settle into the role of both mother and protector. She had learned more than she ever thought possible, about herself, about the children, and about the fine balance it took to make it all work. Though the journey was still far from easy, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere of their home. What had once been an unfamiliar, chaotic transition was slowly starting to feel like something resembling normalcy, even if it wasn't the normal they had all once known. Nida's first major challenge came in the form of school. With 5 kids, each at different stages of their education, it felt as if her life revolved around nothing but homework, parent-teacher conferences, and school events. Malik, now 14, was in high school, and though he was a quiet, self-sufficient teenager, he still struggled. His grades had begun to slip, and Nida could see the weight he carried, the responsibility he had taken on as an unspoken leader in the family. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the burden of trying to protect his siblings while silently grieving his mother. Tiana, though older than Elijah and Maya, was still only 12, and her rebellious nature was starting to emerge. The absence of her mother was becoming too much to bear, and she began to lash out in new ways. She argued with Nida more frequently, resisted rules, and withdrew into herself whenever Nida tried to talk about her feelings. Tiana was a fighter, a survivor, but there was so much inside her that Nida wasn't sure how to reach. Elijah, at 7, had grown more accustomed to his new environment. He still had the same boundless energy, but he had learned to focus it more productively. He loved school, especially science, and spent hours tinkering with little projects around the apartment, making his own mini experiments with whatever he could find. His curiosity was endless, and sometimes Nida found herself laughing in amazement at the wild ideas he would come up with. He had an imagination that was bigger than the apartment, and though his experiments often left the place looking like a mess, they made Nida proud. Maya, 5, was still the gentle, loving soul of the group. She found comfort in simple things: drawing, playing with her dolls, or holding Zion's hand as they wandered through the park. There was a certain purity about Maya that reminded Nida of the innocence she wished all the children could have. Maya still missed her mother deeply, but it was through her that Nida felt a deeper connection to their shared grief. Maya's tenderness became a balm for the wounds that were still too raw. Zion, at 2, was no longer the little bundle of uncertainty he had once been. He had begun to settle into the family dynamic, recognizing Nida as the mother figure he had always needed. Though he still often reached for Elisa's picture with a soft, questioning look in his eyes, he was learning to trust Nida in a way that was both humbling and heartwarming. Zion's little hands, his bright eyes, and his innocent chatter became the center of Nida's world. His tiny voice calling for Mama made the exhaustion worth it every single time. But despite the quiet joys and small victories, Nida couldn't escape the constant undercurrent of fear. What if she wasn't enough for them? What if her love wasn't enough to heal their wounds? She was constantly faced with the thought that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be able to replace Elisa. One particularly difficult evening, Nida sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. It was a Thursday night, and like every Thursday night, she was helping Malik with his homework. He had retreated further into himself, avoiding conversation and barely making eye contact. His grades had dipped, and he seemed almost disengaged from the world around him. When Nida tried to ask him about it, he would brush her off, saying he was fine. But Nida wasn't blind. She saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of his guilt, the struggle he carried in silence. Malik had always been the strong one, the one who kept everything together. But Nida knew that his heart was breaking. He was trying to be everything Elisa had been for his siblings, but he was only a 14-year-old boy. How could he possibly carry such a heavy load? Malik, Nida said one evening after the homework session had ended, I need you to talk to me. I know you're carrying a lot. I see it, and I want you to know you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you. We're all in this together. For a long time, Malik didn't respond. He sat across from her, his head down, staring at the table. His hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of his shirt, and for a moment, Nida wasn't sure he would say anything at all. Then, in a voice so quiet she almost missed it, he whispered, I'm supposed to take care of them. I'm supposed to be the man now, but I don't know how. The words broke Nida's heart, but she didn't let him see her emotion. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. Malik, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. I'm always going to be here. You don't have to take on all the responsibility. You're allowed to feel how you feel. You're allowed to grieve. You're still a kid, and it's okay to not have all the answers. Malik didn't speak for a long while, but Nida saw the subtle shift in him. It wasn't much, but she could see the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. That night, after Malik had gone to bed, Nida sat in the kitchen for hours, staring at the family picture Elisa had once placed on the wall. The picture showed them all, smiling together. Elisa, her 5 kids, and Nida. It had been taken on one of their rare vacations, a sunny day at the beach, where they had all laughed and splashed in the waves. Nida ran her fingers over the frame, her heart swelling with both grief and love. She had promised Elisa that she would keep them together, that she would make sure they would have the life they deserved. It hadn't been easy, but with every challenge, every new day, Nida was reminded of why she had made that promise. The next day, Nida called in some support. She reached out to a child therapist, someone she had met through a community center who specialized in grief counseling for children. She knew the kids needed help processing their emotions, and though it wasn't an easy decision, Nida knew it was time. The children weren't just grieving the loss of their mother, they were also adjusting to a new life, a new family dynamic, and Nida wanted to make sure they had the tools to cope. Therapy sessions began the following week. It was tough at first, as the children resisted the idea, especially Malik, who felt embarrassed about opening up to a stranger. But over time, the sessions proved to be beneficial. Malik began to speak more openly about his guilt. Tiana slowly started to work through her anger, and even Elijah began to talk about his fear of losing another person he loved. Maya and Zion, though too young for therapy, found their own way of healing. Maya began to open up more in her drawings, and Zion would cuddle up to Nida, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. As the months went on, the family began to shift. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, and emotional flare-ups. But the bond they shared was undeniable. Nida began to see the fruits of her labor. And though she didn't have all the answers, she knew one thing. She had done right by them. The kids weren't the only ones learning. Nida was learning, too, about herself, about love, and about the incredible strength of the human heart. Each day was a new chapter in their journey, a journey that was still unfolding in ways she never could have imagined. But with every challenge they faced, she found herself becoming more and more certain of one thing. They were going to be okay. The test of time. As the months turned into years, Nida began to see the children grow in ways that both filled her heart with pride and broke it with sorrow. The promise she had made to Elisa, one she hadn't fully realized the gravity of at the time, was now her entire life. Every day, every choice she made was centered around fulfilling that commitment. And though there were still moments of doubt, moments when Nida felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, there were also moments of profound beauty and connection that made it all worth it. Malik had evolved into an exceptional young man, though he often didn't see it that way. He still carried the burden of responsibility, but it was no longer the suffocating weight it had once been. With Nida's support, he had begun to open up more, sharing his fears, his dreams, and his frustrations. The therapy sessions had helped him understand that he wasn't alone in this journey, and it allowed him to take a step back from the role he had created for himself as the protector. Malik was learning to be a teenager again, to laugh, to make mistakes, to dream without the constant pressure of being the man of the house. But that didn't mean it was easy for him. School was still a struggle, and Nida could see how hard he worked to balance academics with the emotional strain of being a big brother to 4 younger kids. It was in his quiet moments, when he thought no one was watching, that Nida saw his vulnerability. The way his hands would shake when he reached for his guitar to play a song his mother used to sing to him. The way his eyes would fill with unused tears whenever he talked about his mother and how much he missed her. Nida had learned not to push him when he didn't want to talk. She respected his space, but she always let him know that when he was ready, she would be there to listen. Tiana, on the other hand, was still a whirlwind. At 15, she had become more independent, but the rebellious spark that had first emerged in her still flared up from time to time. She had a fiery spirit, one that Nida admired and also feared. Tiana was not afraid to speak her mind, to question authority, to stand up for what she believed in, even if it meant clashing with Nida at times. And though it hurt Nida when Tiana stormed off in anger, refusing to talk for days, Nida knew this was part of the process. Grief had manifested in Tiana as defiance, but underneath the anger was a young woman struggling to make sense of a world that had been turned upside down. One day, after another heated argument, Tiana slammed the door to her room, and Nida could hear her muffled sobs from the hallway. Nida paused outside the door, torn between wanting to comfort her and respecting her daughter's need for space. She knocked gently, and after a long pause, Tiana opened the door. Her face was streaked with tears, and her eyes were red from crying. "Can I come in?" Nida asked softly. Tiana hesitated, then stepped aside. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, wiping her eyes. "I didn't mean to yell." Nida sat beside her on the bed, wrapping her arms around her. "You don't have to apologize. I know you're hurting. I am too. But we can't fight each other. I'm not your enemy, Tiana. I'm here because I love you, and I want to help you through this." Tiana buried her face in Nida's shoulder, her body shaking with sobs. For a long time, Nida held her, letting her cry it out. It was one of those rare moments when Tiana allowed herself to break down. When she finally pulled away, Nida noticed something had shifted in her. The walls had come down, just a little, and it felt like they were finally beginning to understand each other again. Elijah, always the curious and lively one, had entered a phase of discovery and creativity. At 10, he was now old enough to have deep conversations with Nita about anything and everything. His school projects, his dreams of becoming an inventor, his desire to travel the world. Elijah had always been the little boy with big ideas, but now he was starting to make those ideas a reality. He had built a small rocket ship out of cardboard and duct tape, which he proudly displayed in the living room. It didn't work, of course, but to Elijah, it was proof that he could create anything he imagined. Nita was amazed by his imagination and the way he could take anything he found and turn it into something useful, something meaningful. He had developed a deep love for science and technology, and every evening he would drag Nita into his experiments, eager to show her the latest invention he had come up with. Nita was fascinated by how much Elijah had grown, how resilient he was, how strong his spirit remained, even after everything he had been through. She often marveled at how far he had come. From the scared little boy who couldn't understand why his mother was gone to the confident, inquisitive child he was now. Maya, now 8, had blossomed into a gentle, thoughtful young girl. She still loved to draw, but her art had grown more sophisticated, often depicting scenes of hope, love, and strength. Maya's drawings had become her way of processing the emotions she didn't always have the words for. Nita often found herself staring at the little sketches that lined the walls of the apartment. Pictures of the family, pictures of Elisa, and pictures of Nita. In each drawing, Maya's love for her family was clear, but so was the grief. One day, as Nita was cleaning up the living room, she found a drawing of a family standing together in a field, holding hands. At the bottom of the drawing, Maya had written in large, childlike letters, "We are together forever." It was simple but profound. Maya had somehow understood, in her own way, that they were a family now, bound together by love and the shared experience of loss. And though they would always carry the weight of that loss, Maya's drawing reminded Nita that they had found something new, a family that would stand together, no matter what. Zion, at 5, was the heart of the family. His infectious laughter, his carefree spirit, and his unwavering trust in Nita had become a constant source of joy in their lives. His days were filled with play and adventure, and he seemed to have an innate sense of how to make others smile. Even during the hardest times, Giant could be found running through the apartment, his tiny feet thumping against the floor as he giggled with glee. He had a knack for finding joy in the little things, and he often reminded the others, especially Nita, that life, even after tragedy, could still be beautiful. But the years hadn't been without their challenges. Nita's job, though fulfilling, was demanding, and there were days when it felt as if she couldn't catch her breath. The children were older now, and their needs had changed. It wasn't just about getting them to school or making sure they ate their vegetables anymore. They had their own lives, their own dreams, and their own struggles. Nita found herself balancing between being a mother and trying to maintain some semblance of her own identity. It wasn't always easy. There were days when she felt pulled in 1,000 directions, when she longed for a moment of peace or a sense of personal accomplishment. Yet, even on those days, when exhaustion threatened to take over, Nita found her strength in her children. She had come to realize that they weren't just surviving. They were thriving. They were becoming young adults, each in their own unique way, and she had been there for every step of their journey. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night had led her to this moment. They weren't just her adopted children. They were her children, her family. Nita sat in the living room one evening, watching as Malik played his guitar, Tiana worked on a school project, Elijah tinkered with his latest invention, Maya read a book, and Zion colored at the table. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of chaos, still arguments and disagreements. But it was theirs. It was their family, their new beginning. And as Nita looked around at the faces of the children she had promised to protect, she felt a warmth in her heart that she had never known before. She had done it. They had done it. Together, they had built a life. The journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. They were stronger than ever. No matter what came next, Nida knew they would face it as a family, and that thought filled her with a peace she hadn't felt in years. The heart of the storm. Years had passed, and the family had grown in ways both expected and unexpected. Nida, now deeply woven into the fabric of the children's lives, had experienced countless moments of joy, sadness, frustration, and triumph. She had learned how to navigate the complexities of motherhood, especially the kind of motherhood that came with the unique challenges of adopting children who had already experienced loss. But even though things had calmed down in many ways, the storms of life had a way of sneaking up on them when they least expected it. Nida had always believed that once the children reached a certain age, things would become easier. She had expected a sense of stability to settle in. But what she had learned was that growing up wasn't just about reaching milestones. It was about confronting the constant evolution of self, of identity, and the ways in which grief never fully fades. Malik, now 17, was at a crossroads. He had always been the dependable one, the protector, the one who kept everything together. But as he prepared to graduate high school, he found himself struggling in ways he had never expected. College acceptance letters were starting to arrive, but instead of excitement, Malik felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. The idea of leaving home, leaving Nida, leaving his siblings, seemed impossible. He had spent years holding the family together, and now he felt like a ship that was slowly drifting away from its moorings. The pressure of living up to the expectations he had set for himself was overwhelming. Malik had always been the one to put everyone else's needs first, but now, standing on the precipice of adulthood, he realized that he didn't even know who he was outside of being the eldest sibling. He had never taken the time to explore his own passions, his own dreams. Instead, he had buried them beneath the weight of responsibility. And now, as he prepared for his next chapter, he was consumed by uncertainty. One evening after dinner, Nida found Malik sitting by himself in the living room, staring at the blank pages of a college application. His guitar was propped up against the couch, but he wasn't playing it. He didn't even seem to notice her enter the room. Nida hesitated for a moment before walking over to him, sitting down beside him. She didn't say anything right away, simply sat quietly, letting him breathe. "Malik," Nida finally said softly, "what's going on? You've been so quiet lately." He didn't answer at first, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers nervously twisted the hem of his shirt. "I don't know if I'm ready to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can. I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone else, and now that I'm supposed to take care of myself, I don't even know what that means." Nida could hear the sadness in his voice, the fear of letting go of the role he had carried for so long. "You don't have to do it all alone, Malik," she said, her voice full of understanding. "I've seen the man you've become, and I'm so proud of you, but you're not just the protector. You're allowed to be whoever you want to be. I've always been here for you, and I always will be. But you need to allow yourself to live for you too." Malik's eyes filled with tears, and Nida could see how much he was struggling. "I don't know who I am without being the big brother," he admitted, his voice breaking. Nida gently cupped his face in her hands, her heart aching for him. "You're Malik. You're smart, compassionate, and full of potential. You're not just a caretaker. You're a person with your own dreams and desires. Don't let fear keep you from exploring those parts of yourself. You've done everything you can for this family, and now it's time for you to do something for you." Malik took a shaky breath, letting the weight of her words sink in. For a moment, there was a silence between them, a kind of understanding that only a mother and child could share. Nida didn't push him to make a decision. She simply sat beside him, offering her unwavering support. Meanwhile, Tiana was facing her own struggles. At 16, she was growing more independent, and though she still had her rebellious streak, there was a quiet wisdom starting to take root within her. She had always been a fighter, someone who didn't take no for an answer. But in the last year, Nida had noticed that Tiana was becoming more thoughtful. Her defiance had begun to transform into a deeper desire for understanding. She wanted to know her mother's story, wanted to understand what had shaped her into the person she was. One afternoon, as they were cleaning up after a family meal, Tiana approached Nida, her expression serious. "Mom," she began, using the word more often now, "I've been thinking a lot about Elisa, about how she loved us, and about the kind of mother she was." Nida paused in her task, surprised by the question. She had never really talked about Elisa in detail with Tiana, knowing that it was still a painful subject. But now, there was a maturity in Tiana's voice that made Nida want to share. "She was a fighter," Nida said quietly. "She loved you all more than anything. She was always thinking about what was best for you, even in the toughest times. And I think that's something you carry with you too. The ability to fight for the people you love." Tiana smiled softly. "Yeah, I think I get that from her. But I'm not sure if I'm doing it right." Nida's heart swelled with pride. "You're doing it exactly how you need to. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to figure things out as you go. What matters is that you're trying, and that you're willing to learn." Tiana didn't say anything more, but Nida could tell that the conversation had resonated with her. Tiana wasn't just growing up. She was growing into someone who had the capacity to truly heal, to understand her place in the world, and to be at peace with her own journey. Elijah, too, was evolving. At 12, his natural curiosity had grown into a fierce determination to pursue his passions. He spent hours studying anything and everything related to science and technology, often staying up late into the night reading books or watching online tutorials. One evening, Nida found him hunched over a homemade robot, soldering wires together. His focus was so intense that he didn't notice her enter the room until she cleared her throat. "You're going to turn into a mad scientist if you keep this up," Nida joked, half smiling. Elijah looked up, his eyes bright with excitement. "I'm building a prototype for a robot that can help people clean up after natural disasters," he said, his voice filled with passion. "I've been researching how to make it efficient, and I think it could work." Nida's heart swelled with pride. Elijah had always been the creative one, the one with the ideas that seemed too big for this world. But to see him so focused, so determined, made her believe in him even more. He wasn't just a boy with dreams. He was on his way to turning those dreams into reality. Maya, now 10, had become the artistic soul of the family. Her drawings had evolved into elaborate landscapes filled with vibrant colors and intricate details. She had also begun to write stories, each one a reflection of her inner world. Her talent had begun to garner attention, and Nida found herself marveling at how much her daughter had grown. But it wasn't just Maya's art that had changed. It was her attitude, her perspective on life. There was a quiet strength about her now, a resilience that spoke of her ability to carry her own grief and transform it into something beautiful. Maya had become the bridge between the past and the future, carrying with her the memories of her mother, while also creating a new path forward for herself. Zion, now 7, was still the light of their lives. His joy was infectious, and his innocence was a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there was always room for laughter. He had formed a close bond with each of his siblings, but it was with Nida that he shared his most tender moments. He would often climb onto her lap and ask her to tell him stories about when he was little or about his mother. Zion had a way of grounding the family, reminding them that, no matter how far they had come or how much they had changed, they were still a family, united by love. But no matter how much the children had grown, there was always the underlying current of loss that connected them. It wasn't a burden they could ever fully escape, but it was a part of who they were. Elisa was gone, but she was never forgotten. Her love, her strength, and her spirit lived on in each of them. And as Nida sat in the living room one quiet evening, surrounded by her children, she realized something profound. They had all healed in their own ways. They had found a way to move forward, to live with the pain without being consumed by it. And though there would always be challenges ahead, Nida knew that together They could face anything. The road was long, but they were stronger than they had ever been. They were no longer just surviving. They were living, thriving, and building a future full of hope and possibility. The ripple of change. As the seasons passed and the years continued to unfold, the winds of change swept through Nida's home in unexpected ways. The children were no longer the little ones she had taken in so many years ago. They had become young adults, each carving their own paths, each facing their own challenges. And yet, despite the growing distance between them, both physically as they took on new ventures and emotionally as they developed their own identities, there was one undeniable truth that anchored them all. They were still a family. But Nida was no longer the same woman she had been when she first agreed to take on this monumental responsibility. She had evolved too. The exhaustion of early parenthood, the sleepless nights spent comforting a crying child or comforting a teenager in turmoil, had gradually been replaced by a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had found balance in her life, but she also knew that the work of mothering was never truly finished. It wasn't long before the ripple effects of the sacrifices Nida had made began to show themselves in ways she could never have predicted. The children, who had once relied so heavily on her, were now reaching back out, ready to give in ways that left her breathless with gratitude. Malik, after months of inner conflict, had finally decided to pursue college. He had chosen a local university, deciding that he wanted to stay close to home and continue being there for his family. It wasn't easy. He still struggled with the idea of stepping away from the protective role he had assumed for so long. But after months of deep reflection and conversations with Nida, he had realized that he didn't need to be physically present all the time to be a good son or sibling. College, for Malik, was not just an academic pursuit. It was his chance to reclaim his own dreams and figure out who he was outside of being the caretaker. Nida watched as Malik thrived in this new chapter. He came home often, especially during breaks, eager to share his experiences and newfound knowledge. He had begun to explore his interests, particularly in social work, something that seemed to resonate with his deep desire to help others. But it wasn't just about academics for Malik anymore. It was about finding peace within himself. His relationship with Nida, once weighed down by unspoken fears and expectations, was now grounded in a new kind of understanding. He was beginning to let go of the guilt he had carried for so long and was learning to accept love and support from others, especially Nida. One afternoon, as Nida was sitting in the kitchen preparing dinner, Malik walked in. His face lit up with an expression she hadn't seen before. "Mom," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. I don't think I've ever really said it. But thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me." Nida turned to face him, her heart swelling with emotion. She set down the knife she had been holding, her hand suddenly trembling. "You don't need to thank me," she replied softly. "I didn't do it alone, Malik. You fought just as hard. You've always been strong, even when you didn't realize it." Malik smiled, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But you made me believe in myself. You helped me see that I didn't have to be everything to everyone, and that I was worthy of happiness. That's something I'll never forget." In that moment, Nida realized that the years of hardship, the moments of doubt, and the sleepless nights had not been in vain. Her sacrifices had not only shaped the lives of her children, but had allowed them to heal in their own time and in their own way. Malik, who had once carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, was now stepping into his own light, and she had been a part of that transformation. Tiana, too, had begun to find her own voice. Though she had struggled with anger and confusion for so long, the past few years had brought her a deep sense of introspection. She had spent time volunteering at local organizations, helping to tutor younger children, and using her experiences to inspire others. Nida often found herself in awe of Tiana's strength, the way she could take her pain and turn it into something that could help others. Tiana had always been a fierce spirit, but now that fierceness was directed toward making the world a better place. One evening, as Nida was cleaning up the kitchen after a family dinner, Tiana approached her with a serious look on her face. "Mom, I've been thinking about something," Tiana said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I want to go to college. I know I've always said I didn't want to leave home, but I think it's time for me to start building my future, to really focus on something that matters." Nada paused, her heart swelling with pride. Tiana had always been so full of fire, so focused on defying expectations, and to hear her now speak with such clarity was a beautiful surprise. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Nida said gently. "You've always had the ability to make an impact, Tiana. I know you'll do amazing things." Tiana smiled, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "It's not going to be easy, but I'm ready, and I know that no matter where I go, I'll always have you." Tiana's words resonated deeply with Nida. She had always worried about her daughter, worried that the walls she had built around her would keep her from experiencing the world outside. But Tiana's decision to go to college, to step into her future, was proof that her walls were coming down. She was ready to live fully, to embrace her potential, and to give back in ways she never had before. Elijah had blossomed into a young innovator. At 15, his passion for science and technology had only intensified, and he had started to build actual working prototypes of his inventions. He would spend hours in the garage, tinkering with different parts, creating machines that could help people in everyday life. His dream of becoming an engineer had become a burning reality. Nida marveled at his creativity, the way he was able to see solutions to problems that no one else could even see. One day, he came to Nida, excitement radiating from him. "Mom, I've been talking to some professors from the university about doing an internship in their engineering lab. I can't believe they want me to join them." Nida's heart leaped. She had always known that Elijah had something special about him. His inventions, no matter how small, were changing the way he looked at the world. And now, he was ready to change the world itself. "That's amazing, Elijah," Nida said, her voice filled with pride. "I'm so proud of you. This is the first step to something incredible." Maya, too, was finding her voice in her art. Her drawings, once simple sketches, had evolved into a powerful form of storytelling. She had started to create a collection of works that captured the complexities of family, grief, and healing. Her art had become her way of processing the emotions she hadn't been able to articulate. It was raw, beautiful, and deeply personal. And it didn't take long before Nida realized that Maya's art was not just something she did for herself. It was something that had the power to change others. One day, Maya came home from school with a look of excitement on her face. "Mom, my art teacher wants to display some of my pieces in a local gallery. I can't believe it's happening." Nida gasped, her hands shaking with pride. "Maya, that's incredible. You've worked so hard for this. I knew your art was special." Maya beamed, her face lighting up with the joy of seeing her dreams start to take shape. "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done it without your support." And then there was Zion, the youngest, whose infectious spirit had continued to light up their world. At 8 years old, he had a way of making everyone smile, no matter what the day had been like. His laughter filled the rooms of their home, and his innocence reminded everyone of the power of joy. But Zion, too, was growing up. He was learning about the world around him, about the challenges his family had faced, and about the power of love and resilience. One night, as Nida tucked Zion into bed, he turned to her with a serious look in his eyes. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." Nida's heart fluttered with emotion. She kissed his forehead gently, brushing his hair away from his face. "You can be anything you want to be, Zion. You're already so special. I want to be kind, like you," Zion said, his voice soft with sincerity. "I want to help people, just like you help us." Tears filled Nida's eyes as she looked down at her youngest son. The weight of the journey, the years of sacrifice, the pain, the healing, had led her to this moment. They had all come so far. They had all grown, each in their own way, but they were still a family. And that was the greatest gift of all. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt and fear. But Nida knew one thing for sure. They had created something beautiful together. A family bound by love, resilience, and a deep understanding that no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. The ripple of change had begun all those years ago, and now it had created a legacy that